all. We see a lot of fox guarding the chicken coop these days, of course, but there's a news item just came out. I'm going to show you an excerpt, and the fox is kind of managing the chicken coop or the hen house. And Dr. Asim Malhotra, a crusading cardiologist and defender of evidence-based medicine, is here in this great news item and goes through the actual funding of the regulatory agencies by the very people they're regulating. So you may be shocked at some of the figures, but it's a fascinating discussion, so please do enjoy.
When it comes to the medicines we take, we want to trust that what we're prescribed is safe and it will do the job we are taking it for. To make sure that's the case, the pharmaceutical industry is heavily regulated. But where do these regulators get their money? What if I told you some of it comes from the very industry it is governing? Does that surprise you? What might surprise you more is quite how much. Well, the BMJ has today published peer-reviewed analysis into just that, and the findings are shocking. The BMJ asked regulators in Australia, Canada, Europe, Japan, the UK and the US a series of questions about their annual budget funding. And here is how they compared. In Australia, the regulator takes 96% of its funding from Pharma. In Europe, it's 89%. Here in the UK, self-venerating over its National Health Service, the medicines watchdog, the MHRA, gets a whopping 86% of its funding from industry giants. In America, often demonised for its private healthcare model, it's 65%. And in Canada, it's just over half. Well, should we be worried? It's hard to trust what we are prescribed is free from the interests of big business when it comes to details like that. Well, I'm joined now by Dr. Asim Malhotra, consultant cardiologist and president of the Public Health Collaboration. Asim, what's your take on that? I was astonished to find out that the industry regulator in the UK, 86% coming from big pharma. I mean, that seems like a giant, a clash of interests.
Yeah, this investigation by Marion Damasi for the BMJ is, as you've said already, deeply shocking, but perhaps not surprising. It's a gross conflict of interest. And as described in her article, you know, this is a symptom of institutional corruption, if you like. And the problem is that when you have such gross conflicts of interest, and we know historically that the regulators, the drugs that get approved, you know, they're not rigorously evaluated, they're not independent, they withhold data on harms quite often, and they're essentially not fit for purpose. And it's highlighted in the article as well by one commentator that we have to actually treat until the system changes, we can't fully trust the regulator to be doing its job properly. They're not fit for purpose. And I think the other thing to add in as well, Alex, I mean, I've been giving lectures on this particular topic and this area of pharmaceutical industry influence over clinical decision-making over the last few weeks. And one very senior NHS leader who came to one of my lectures was not aware. He was shocked about this specific data. For example, 86% of the funding of the MHRA in this country comes from the pharmaceutical industry. And this particular person actually has been quite influential, certainly in trying to encourage people to uptake the vaccine or other drugs in the mainstream media and even in his own practice. And he wasn't aware of it. So I think this highlights something else, is that doctors, patients, the general population don't know what's happening, and they don't even know that they don't know.
I mean, there have been lots of reports lately that in the UK we are a very overdrugged country, that people are taking far too many medicines and that some of them are having extremely serious interactions with other medicines, landing a lot of elderly people, especially in hospital. Now, in this report, we know now that the pharmaceutical industry is funding the regulators, but does that, in your opinion, create a direct stream of influence from the big pharma to the regulator?
Absolutely. So also what's highlighted in this really brilliant article, it's very rigorous, so people should, it's open access, you can get hold of it and read it yourself. It's shown over the years, as there's been more funding coming from the drug industry for approval of drugs, the quality of the evidence is reduced. And if you look at actually data even going by many years, for example, of the 3,000 health interventions that are carried out in Europe, only 11% of them are thought to be truly beneficial for patients. Over 150 million euros a day is wasted because of corruption in healthcare systems. And this is something that, is a huge issue. It's a major issue because if you look at, and I've analyzed this myself, if you look at the impact of drugs that have been approved, say, in Europe and across the Western world over the last 2 to 3 decades, Alex, most of those drugs have been proven to be copies of old ones. And actually only a very small minority have been shown to be truly beneficial, and many to be more harmful than beneficial. So what do we conclude from that? Well, the overall net effect of the drug industry on society, in my view, has been a negative one in the last few decades. And part of the reason for that is there's been increasing deregulation. So you go back to the late 80s or early 90s, only a small proportion of the funding of the regulator came from the drug industry. Most of it was publicly funded. So where do we go from here? I think one of the key things is, although drug companies should be developing drugs, they should have no role in testing them, and certainly not then hiding the data. The regulators should be publicly funded. And I think until all of this changes, one of the things, and I have conversations with patients and about this all the time, and they're shocked and actually, to be honest, outraged by this situation they're not aware of. I think until the situation changes, people need to understand that all drug industry-sponsored trials should be seen as marketing until proven otherwise.
These are extremely strident things that you're saying. They are backed up by a peer-reviewed report in the BMJ, leading medical journal. How worried should we really be? It's quite easy to paint a picture of nefarious goings-on, of big pharma as a huge shadowy industry who doesn't care about our health, only about their profit margins. Is it really that bad, or is this a case of looking at something which could become potentially quite serious in certain areas if it isn't sorted out now?
I think it's very bad, actually. And it comes back to really the legal obligation of the drug industry. People need to understand is to produce profit for shareholders. They have no legal obligation to give you the best treatment. But the real scandal, and this was pointed out by cardiologist Peter Wilmses in the Centre of Evidence-Based Medicine in a talk he gave in 2015, the real scandal is that doctors, institutions, medical journals collude with industry for financial gain, and the regulators fail to prevent misconduct by industry. And we have a wealth of evidence of fraud that's been committed by the pharmaceutical industry over the years, but for them it's the cost of business, because even though they've committed fraud, and we're talking about most of the top 10 pharmaceutical companies, and don't have to name any particular one over the years, even though they've committed fraud, in almost all of those cases, nobody got fired, no one lost their job. They were indemnified, if you like, from actually any kind of legal action against people within the company, even when they were deliberately, knowingly committing fraud. And then, even though they've been fined for those, malpractice, if you like, or deceiving the public or regulators, they actually end up making more money from profit of the drugs than they do from the criminal investigations and the harm that's, So the system, it's basically a symptom of our system failure. And then, why are we even talking about this? Well, what's happening to population health? You said earlier that, a lot of hospital admissions in the elderly are because of dangerous drug interactions, about a quarter, actually. One estimate suggests that the third most common cause of death after heart disease and cancer is prescribed medications. In the UK, we've had a stalling life expectancy since 2010. And now, in the last few years, we've seen that in many parts of the country, healthy life expectancy has reduced. And at the root of this problem, of course, we've talked about obesity and lifestyle, but what's the twin evil, if you like, that's affecting population health in a negative way is essentially too much unchecked power of industries whose only motivation is profit, not to look after your health.
Dr. Asim Malhotra, thank you so much for coming to the studio and bringing us this really startling story. Always good to have you on. Benedict, I'm going to come to you. When I read this report and looked at those statistics, I was horrified. I was absolutely horrified. What's your response to this?
Well, you might have been horrified, but were you surprised when you thought about it? I'm not particularly surprised to hear that this sort of thing goes on in the medical establishment, because actually it happens in sort of just about every big industry where you have that sort of crossover between lucrative government contracts, the need for an independent regulator, and the free market. Is that ultimately, as Dr. Malhotra says, it's not about your well-being, it's about making money. It's about pushing as many of the pills or the treatments down your throat as possible. Sometimes, often, it is very beneficial, but not always. And I think, when you juxtapose that with how much, for example, the NHS pays for contracts to buy a lot of these treatments, I can't remember what the stat is about how much more expensive it is to take a paracetamol that's been given to you by the NHS than it is to buy one over the counter. You begin to see it's a culture of waste, but it's not really about waste because somebody's profiting quite massively off of this. And you'll see this in lots of other areas. You'll see it, for example, in military contracts. You even see it in sport. The number sort of crossover of how much money a governing body gets from the people that it's supposed to be governing, but also the crossover in terms of people who have worked in one aspect of the industry who then end up going to work for the regulator, or, for example, have worked in government in that area and then have gone to work for the regulator and then gone to work for. Do you see what I mean? You've got this network going on where lots of people who ought to be sort of above the fray, they ought to be very sort of rational and independent of all of these things, actually, by their very nature, by being industry insiders and experts, which is what you want in order to regulate it, they're perhaps not going into things with your best interest as the consumer at heart, because they want you to consume.
Well, we approached the UK's Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency for a statement on the British Medical Journal's investigation, and a spokesperson said all our regulatory decisions are based on the safety, quality and effectiveness of the medicine under review and are in no way influenced by the set fees we charge for the services we provide to the industry. All independent experts that advise us are robustly managed according to our strict code of practice. Asim, does that reassure you, reading that, or, do you...
Not at all. I mean, let's just look at the reality of, as I've highlighted already, population health is getting worse. And a lot of it is driven because of false perceptions about the benefits of these drugs. Harms are underplayed. It causes huge damage. And I think the one thing to say is, I think people are well-intentioned, but the problem is these conflicts of interest create this system, they contribute to this system failure, and money clouds judgment.
Dr. Asim Malhotra, Benedict Spence, thank you ever so much.
As always, thanks so much for your support. I really appreciate it. The links are down below for anyone who can help support me to get out there and get the best news, the best science, the best data, the best integration of the data, interpretation of the data, an explanation of the data, so that you can better know what's going on in the world today. So thank you.